What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Thursday morning edition of the Sharp Angles podcast. We appreciate you joining us. If you're listening to us as a podcast, we appreciate that. Please, rate and review. But also, you can head over to YouTube, to Sharp Football Analysts YouTube. You can subscribe to the channel. You get notifications when we go live. We do this every single Thursday morning at 11:30 Eastern. I say every single Thursday morning, but I think Thanksgiving's coming soon. We're probably not going to do it on Thanksgiving morning. We will do other things, but almost every other Thursday morning of the season, Rich and I will be here to talk to you. And speaking of holidays, we're to my least favorite holiday. We're to Halloween. Rich, how are you celebrating Halloween, and how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's actually I'm actually looking forward to it because the last couple of years we've done trick or treating, and I have some friends, and he brings his daughters, and all our kids go together. But I've had to write worksheet games afterwards, so like we've had to go trick or treating, and then I just go back to writing up worksheet games. So
Yeah.
it's nice to not have to do that this year.
Yeah, that is nice. It is a little bit nice, and it's also nice that they gave us a Thursday night game that I'm not sure how good it is. I'm not sure how great this is that we're dealing with in this Thursday night game. So that's a little bit of a extra carrot. The World Series went ahead and got over with. I will say one of these championships behind me, I don't actually remember which one, was it Astros that like they won on Halloween, I think, or had a big win on Halloween. And so I was outside like trying to, like talk to the kids and like interact with humans while running inside to watch the rest of the game. And that didn't go over, very well with my wife, but
Yeah. How do you do, fellow
here
kids?
we are. Yeah, I mean, what are you gonna do? Like, I don't have any kids. Why do I need to talk to everybody else's
Do
kids?
you
Like, I
guys
don't.
hand out candy, or do you just not participate?
We are candy hand outers. Yeah,
Okay.
I do enjoy handing out candy. I'm not a giant fan. Like, I love like the kid aspect of Halloween. Like the other day they had a trunk or treat at the
hmm
elementary school down the road that my friends' kids go to, and it was awesome. I love the kid version of Halloween. I'm just very
Yeah, yeah.
confused by the adult version of Halloween because I guess it's just a reason to party, and if I just view it that way, that's fine. But like y'all are adults. Y'all know that y'all can dress up as Batman every day that you want to in the year. You do not need a special occasion. I feel this way the same way I feel about Valentine's Day. You don't need a special occasion to go out on a date with your significant other. You can just do that throughout the year. Like you can just buy people presents throughout the year. You don't need a special occasion to do so. It's so weird to me, like this holiday culture we have. Like you can just go and do stuff. You're an adult. Just go do things. Like it's fine. You don't need the calendar to tell you that you can wear Spider-Man pajamas. You can wear Spider-Man pajamas every single day. You're an adult. Have fun. Live your
I mean,
dreams. I'm just I'm confused.
I actually have Spider-Man pajamas on right now. Look.
Yeah, that's what I like to see. See, Rich is living his best life. He is living his best life, and that's what we like to see. Yeah, no, I'm always confused by this. The other thing I might be coming in hot on Halloween, and the reason is because Netflix just released something called like time clip or time jump or something like that, in which this person is going back all the way in the past to the year 2003, which is the year that I graduated from high school, and
That was before that.
it's made me feel all sorts of ways, man. Like that 2003 is now viewed as this like where the tweens would go back to in order. Can you think about all those years ago back in 2003, like the trailers playing under a Hillary Duff song? Like it's really got me feeling some way. And the other part about the trailer is that like half of the things there are not really like from 2003. Like they have Heelys in it. There were no
There were
Heelys
no
in
Heelys. Yeah.
2003. Like there were no Heelys. What are we? There were like those like velour like plush tracksuits. Those were definitely later than 2003, right? There's a bunch of stuff in there like I don't. This doesn't feel like 2003. There weren't any tool stickers on anybody's backpacks, which I thought that's definitely not 2003. But so anyway, I might be coming in hot, Rich. I might be coming in hot today.
I
But
love
what are
it
you
though.
gonna
I
do?
listen. We'll take it. It's the halfway point of the NFL season. Like it's going to be November. It's pretty crazy how fast everything moves. We always say like we got to wait for the sample size, wait for the sample size, and like man, it's 2 months in, and like there's still so much stuff in motion.
Yeah, and like that's we're gonna talk about a game. We're gonna talk about the Broncos and the Ravens later. And like as I was looking at that game earlier this week, it was just like one of those things of we're this far into the season and I still feel like there's so much I can learn about specifically the Broncos, but the Ravens as well this week in this matchup. And you're like, how are we this far in and we still have a lot of questions? And that's not even teams changing. Obviously, we have a ton of teams changing. We're going to talk about a few of those as we move forward here as well. And so you have all of these like, how are we this far in the season and we still know nothing is really kind of one of the more interesting things. And let's actually get to that. Let's get to real or fake and talk about, something we did discuss last week, and that is, we were a little bit maybe hesitant on Jameis, that we were going to get Jameis Winston coming in here and being like Joe Flacco at the end of last season, and then he comes out and has a really good game. And I like, are we just in now on this passing offense? There are 4 kind of viable targets that have gotten a ton of targets over the last 2 weeks. Like, what are we doing? Is this passing offense real? Can we kind of be excited about these guys? I guess, namely Cedric Tillman and David Njoku, but even Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore are getting a ton of targets. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean the Browns are interesting because they did have like the Jameis Winston like kind of Flacco type game last week, but it probably is a little bit of a fool's gold. I think Jameis did his Jameis thing. He should have thrown 3 interceptions. He led the NFL in turnover worthy throws. They just didn't catch any of them. Sorry, Kyle Hamilton. But the thing that I'm scared about with the Browns' big picture is their schedule to end the season. I mean, you look at this, they have a bye next week and they come out and then they're at New Orleans. You're not really that scared about it, but they are a good outside perimeter pass defense. And then Steelers at Broncos, at Steelers again, Chiefs. Then you get the Bengals week 16 game. If you get there, like that's the remaining schedule through the fantasy championship. Like that's not good. That's not good at all. So I'm excited like that we have some pulse here and there's a floor for these guys, but I don't think we're gonna get kind of like the big time run out and like maybe spike weeks. And Joku's like the one guy I still have a level of confidence in. I'm sticking a pin in Nick Chubb just because of the 2 matchups and the ramp up, but also like we shouldn't just plan on Nick Chubb being old Nick Chubb based on the significant injury he had. If we get it, by all means, like it's gonna be joyous, but I don't know if we can just expect for that to happen and expect them to start snapping off long runs either. But the remaining schedule for the Browns is absolutely dreadful.
Yeah, I mean, that Steelers run is one that I actually referenced in the waiver column earlier this week, because that is, well, I mean, I guess we'll find out about the Broncos this week, and that's kind of what I was talking about. But I think their pass defense, one of the reasons I liked the Broncos a little more than consensus, was I thought that their defense could be pretty good, and their pass rush was probably a little underrated, even with some of the injuries now they've had. I still think that's true. And so that is that's certainly, a tough run. But what I'll say about, like, if we're just talking about not Jameis himself, because you're right, like, he should have thrown a game-ending interception, and then maybe this conversation is different. But I think the Browns do want to throw, and like maybe it's not going to be 41 times every week that Jameis throws, because that's, that would be a wild number over like a full season sample. But they do still lead the league in drop back rate. They're 3rd in my neutral pass rate filter. With Joe Flacco at the end of last year, they were 5% over their expected pass rate. I kind of think this is what we're going to get from them. And my real concern for the receivers isn't really like the schedule and things like that. It's just there are 4 of them. There are 4 guys that have now gotten considerable targets with Jameis, right? On 56 Jameis Winston dropbacks, Elijah Moore has 13 targets, Jerry Jeudy has 12, Cedric Tillman has 11, and David Njoku has 10. And so if we do see this passing game take a step back, or maybe they only throw 35 passes or whatever this week, then like picking which one of those guys is tough. And that's why I think your point about is Njoku's probably the guy we trust the most here, even though he does have the fewest targets among that list that I said.
I think it's
He's
probably just
probably
because
the
of the
one we trust the
position.
most here.
It's
Yeah,
because of the
that's a
position he
positional thing.
plays.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
a
absolutely. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So, like, that's why you're right. He's the guy we're going to trust more here. I do think it could be some scatter shot for
Yep.
more Jeudy and Tillman. In fact, someone offered me a trade for Jerry Jeudy in a league, and I'm going to hold on to him because the investment they have in him, and we haven't ever seen him be what we thought Jerry Jeudy was going to be, but like there is still some upside there. So it's going to be interesting to kind of watch that situation. I think another situation is going to be interesting to watch is the Indianapolis Colts, who are moving to Joe Flacco. I said on the Monday podcast we are officially on Joe Flacco watch, and then I think like 12 hours later, we got that Flacco was going to start for Anthony Richardson. We're not like a quote unquote real football podcast, so we don't need to have a conversation about whether this is the right decision, which it probably isn't. And a lot of the quotes from the receivers and the coaching staff are really interesting that suggests maybe some stuff's going on behind the scenes. Will Joe Flacco be better than Anthony Richardson right now? I mean, probably, because Anthony Richardson's been bad. And so from a fantasy perspective, the question is, okay, what are we doing moving forward? And it seems like from reading your worksheet preview of this, we're just basically all in on Josh Downs now, right?
I am. I mean, he's been awesome so far. Like when he's been by far the best Colts wide receiver. I don't know if that's just because Pittman is still playing hurt, but Pittman has not looked good at all the entire season. Like he
No.
had the one game against the Steelers, but even last week, he had uncharacteristic drop two last week in that game. Didn't the Colts receivers definitely weren't helping Anthony Richardson. Not that he was helping himself either, but it was definitely a conglomeration of everything bad going bad. But Josh Downs has just been getting open like at will. Like he's just creating a ton of separation. And when you get open, you get targets. And you look at his splits with Joe Flacco. I mean, he's targeted him 28% of the time, and the next closest player is at 18%. So it's a significant gap. He's been targeted on a third of his routes from Joe Flacco. And if you're just getting open and make yourself available, I think that's the biggest key in fantasy football, right? Like I don't know if we'll get into the Deontay Johnson stuff, but like that's like the Ravens surrounding just Lamar now with just players that can get open. What a novel concept, right? And that's what we have with Josh Downs. And it's a great matchup this week. But he's definitely the guy I want to bet on, because anytime we've seen him like fully healthy with a capable quarterback, he's been explosive and he's generated big plays and gotten open. So he's definitely the guy I'm going to invest in.
I'd like you to expand a bit on that great matchup, because you look at them going against the Vikings, and obviously the Vikings pass defense early in the season, we saw what they did. That CJ Stroud game really sticks out in your mind, but it hasn't been as good lately, and Downs also like has the better side of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing too is with the Vikings is that they force so many pass attempts by two different things. One, the run defense has been really good, and then two, they've played with a lead a lot. So like it's just been this like perfect intersection of just forcing teams to have to throw. So they do give up a lot of counting stats. The Lions are similar, but they're better, like down to down than the Vikings are. Like the Lions just play with the lead. They have good run defense. So let's get a little bit shakier here the last couple of weeks, and they just face so many pass attempts that the per target stuff just keeps adding up. It's not that and that's kind of what we have with the Vikings. And then they also have struggled when you look at how receivers have gotten there against them, is these guys that are like combo receivers, guys that can play inside and out, which is what we have with Downs. They're 31st in catches allowed per game to slot receivers, a 23rd in touchdown rate allowed to those players. So it does set up for big time for Josh Downs this week. He's obviously not on the DraftKings main slate. He is on the FanDuel main slate, and they were ahead of it. Like he's 6,900, which is ahead of some other receivers. I remember because the first thing I checked when Flacco got announced, it's like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to play him and fit in DFS this weekend. And then I was like, oh, they were on it with the pricing. So, kudos to FanDuel for being on top of one.
Yeah, you say kudos. The message that I got about that, the message I got about that was not a kudos. It was there was there was some anger behind.
Well, it just means he won't be put in every lineup though, because I still think he's playable at that price. But it just like if he was like 6,000 or something, like he would have just been in every lineup.
Yeah, that's fair. But I did enjoy the just anger and indignation
Yeah,
about
it
it,
was. I mean, it's
for
true.
sure. Speaking of DFS, by the way, Rich gives out his DFS picks, his favorite core plays, his favorite tournament plays, his favorite game stacks. He does that every single week. It usually goes up Friday evening, Saturday morning. That's part of our fantasy package, which, by the way, you could get for 50% off this week using promo code Halloween. So head over to Sharp Football Analysis, check that out. As part of that fantasy package, you'll also get all of his worksheet previews, where he previews every single fantasy relevant player in every single game. So, I mean, there's no better way to get ready for the fantasy football week than to read those worksheet previews. I read them every week. I am excited to be able to do that. So make sure you go and check that out. You mentioned Deontay Johnson, and we now have a lot of receivers that have changed teams in recent
Yeah.
weeks. And I still think we'll talk about Deontay Johnson and kind of that Ravens game later. With DeAndre Hopkins, I think we're still trying to figure out what really that's going to look like. But we now have a couple games from Amari Cooper and Davante Adams. And I was actually asked in the chat on Monday about, how concerned I was about both of them. And so I figured, like, in this kind of real or fake idea. I'd like to get your thoughts about this on, let's get start with Adams and kind of his start here with the Jets, and kind of what's your level of concern that we have here with Adams.
I think if you're betting a touchdown prop, he looks pretty good tonight because of how slot receivers are performed against the Texans. But I'm definitely concerned because of that big picture. Since joining the Jets, he has been moved into the slot. I mean, he's played 50% and 42% of his snaps in the slot. He's been a low A dot player with the Raiders. He was only in the slot right around 26% of the time. And, with that, he only has 22%, 20% of the Jets' air yards. He was at 40% while he was with the Raiders. We've seen kind of him just open some things up for Garrett Wilson downfield. So I'm definitely concerned about his usage. He hasn't been like getting open either, which I think is concerning. And the Jets are probably not a team that are going to have like a ton of pass volume either. So I do have a level of concern with Adams of him being like a ceiling player. Like, I think he's really going to be tethered to, does he score a touchdown or not? And like I said, I do think that if there were a week for him to score a touchdown, Houston's allowed 7 touchdowns to slot receivers this year. So maybe he gets in the box tonight. If you're doing an anytime or first time touchdown, maybe we do see him get in the end zone. But I think big picture, I'm definitely concerned about his ceiling prospects.
Yeah, and I think that that's ultimately where I am as well. I don't know how like high my level of concern is, because I do think that that target floor is probably going to be there, and ultimately, if you're getting opportunities, then that's useful. From fantasy, is a 23.4% target share the last 2 games. Just joining the team too, which is promising. But I think your point about the usage and not being down the field and maybe not getting those full fat, those high cholesterol targets that we like to see, that really is a concern. But then I looked at Cooper, and I remember when these 2 trades happened, we talked about, the situation, and I expressed how much more excited I was about Amari Cooper and kind of what could happen there because of, the issues they had at receiver. But then we've seen now the last 2 weeks, Keon Coleman's playing well. Khalil Shakir, if you target Khalil Shakir, it's a catch. So why wouldn't you target Khalil Shakir? Because every time Josh Allen throws a Khalil Shakir, there's like a 95% chance that it's going to be a completion. And so why wouldn't you do that? We did see Amari Cooper's route rate go up last week, but obviously we didn't see those targets come. And I'm now beginning to get worried that this trade that I thought was going to be a real positive for Amari Cooper in his fantasy value, is he kind of going to get, I don't want to say lost in the wash, because he's still Amari Cooper. He's going to continue to earn more snaps. He's probably going to get targets, but maybe, like you said with Adams, maybe the ceiling here isn't what we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, he probably is going to be a guy that is just pretty volatile. It's funny because if we would have knew Jameis was for sure going to start, like if
We would
like
rather that. Yeah.
if the deities didn't step in and intervene on the Deshaun Watson experiment, we would have loved for Cooper just to stay with a 30% target share, right? Like we would have
Yeah.
loved that, like 25 to 30% target share from Jameis Winston. We would have signed up for that for sure. Because what happened now is he's getting better quarterback play, but he's probably in like this rotation of guys with the Buffalo Bills. And we've seen this with Joe Brady since Joe Brady has taken over as the play caller there. And he has struggled to scheme some things up for outside wide receivers. We saw at the end of the year with Diggs when Shakir was the best receiver. I am still operating under that premise. Like from any time we've seen since Joe Brady's been there, the best wide receiver they've had is Khalil Shakir. I don't think he's going to get jumped in terms of efficiency. I do think there will be some oscillation, like on a weekly level, where it might be a Cooper game, it might be a Coleman game, maybe we have one Kincaid game. I don't know, hopefully, but that's kind of where I think is that it's just like the Josh Allen tree. Like it starts with Josh Allen and then it's just kind of going to be spread around. And now we have James Cook scoring touchdowns too. It's just like a Bills offense that gets everyone involved. I still want to at least hold out though until Cooper is like a full-time player. And maybe he never is, right? And they just do rotate Coleman and him, and they intervene with like interject Matt Collins into the run game and stuff. But because Cooper is still, he only went up to 67% of the routes last week. Let's see if he like gets into like the 80% range, and that becomes like a weekly thing, and then we can maybe judge it. Because like with Adams, we do have like a 2-week sample where he just played all the snaps. So we can kind of get like a tip off on his usage, where Cooper was at 34%, like I said, 67% last week. So if he does get to like consistent usage, we'll see. But maybe he doesn't, because we've seen that with Kincaid, right? Like the biggest thing with Kincaid is not like he's getting targeted when he's on the field. He's just not playing like as much as the other tight ends like that he was regarded as in ADP this summer. I mean, even last week he was on the field for the same amount of dropbacks as Amari Cooper. He's only at 70% for the season. Like that's been his major problem is he's just not on the field as much as the other tight ends.
Yeah, and as it turns out, if you're not on the field, you can't get targets. High level analytics and analysis there for me. But I think that's really when I started to look at kind of the route rates and stuff like that for the Bills this week. That was my takeaway was we got a lot of people in that kind of 50 to 70% range. And maybe that's what they want to do. And obviously it worked well. And Keon Coleman, good on him. I think he's certainly playing better than he was earlier in the season. And so we'll see how long that continues. But if you have a lot of guys in that kind of 50 to 70% range, then picking which one of them it's going to be every week is going to be tricky. And so it is a tough situation. I did want to mention, I didn't actually have him on the list, but kind of your initial thoughts. You have any initial thoughts about DeAndre Hopkins and kind of moving forward with him?
I mean, he only ran 14 routes, so it's like it's really hard to say. I mean, they did play him when he did play, he was more in that Rashee Rice like role, like playing more outside than inside. They've really moved Xavier Worthy into the slot, and then last week they kind of pulled that out too. So it's like I think it's just still nebulous. I want to see like when they're full-time players, basically, is with these guys. And outside of Adams, we've seen like a ramp up. So I would imagine that we get something similar to Deontay Johnson this weekend too, where he's not maybe on the field as much as we want. And then something's going to have to give there anyways with the way they use 3 wide receiver sets in Baltimore. So yeah, we'll stick pin in
Yeah,
that.
we saw with Deontay that Harbaugh came out and said that Bateman was going to continue to kind of play his role. And I was like, I mean, maybe they didn't have to pay a ton to get Deontay Johnson, and Bateman's having his Bateman sance, and so maybe that's it. But I mean, on bulk, what we've seen from their careers, and they don't play really like the same role. But I mean, I think Deontay Johnson's just a better receiver than Rashad Bateman, and so
Well,
we'll
he's
see.
earned more target. He's consistently earned more targets per route.
Yeah.
And it's a bummer because you and I are Bateman fans, and it's been nice to see him play well. He did have a bad drop in the sun last week where he lost the ball in the sun, but he's played really well this year. I mean, he's less than 100 yards away from his career high already, and he's averaging 19 yards per catch. And we were getting this breakout from Zay Flowers too. I mean, Zay Flowers is the wide receiver 6 in target share in the NFL, and that's kind of where like the pieces like start to fit in here is you're like, all right, well, Flowers is the wide receiver 6 in target share, but he also has 3 games at 4 or fewer targets. Like top down passing volume is still an overarching bugaboo for this offense with Lamar Jackson. And they don't run any 11 personnel. They have run 11 personnel, I believe, in 39% of passing plays. They're already 27th in dropback rate. So it's like, all right, like where do we find snaps for Deontay Johnson? What changes here? Obviously, we would expect that to rise, but we still expect this to be kind of a run first team. And if they're beating teams, are they, throwing the ball a lot? So it also could be a problem for Flowers too, despite the initial commentary, because if Deontay Johnson's getting open, he's probably going to get the football. That's how it works. We just talked about that with Josh Downs. I think the big winner is just Lamar Jackson. I mean, you look at Lamar Jackson, and he's now playing with the best set of pass catchers in his career. From ESPN's open score, he has the number 2 player, which is actually Mark Andrews. If you believe that or
Yeah,
not.
I do.
Rashad Bateman is 6th. Zay Flowers is 16th, and Deontay Johnson's 38th. Like he's surrounded with just guys that get open. Like this is the first time in career Lamar Jackson has had like this group of pass catchers. And then you also have that 2-man game with him and Derrick Henry. So, I mean, I know that they lost last week. They had a bad loss in Cleveland. Kind of everything kind of went against them. They'll lose a couple more games this year, but this is arguably on paper though the best offense Lamar Jackson's had.
And actually, we could just talk about that game for a second because I did have it in my list. And the total of that game, I believe, is 46.5. The Ravens are 9.5-point favorites. That's not the kind of game we normally talk about here if we're doing kind of previews, because it's just like, you know, we would expect this game script to go a certain way. We would expect Derrick Henry to get a lot of carries. But the Deontay Johnson part of it, in which, I agree with you. We're going to probably see a ramp up period here. We'll probably see much more Nelson Aguilar this week than people are happy to see. And so there's kind of that side of it. But also, like, this Ravens offense is just, as you mentioned, is just unbelievable. And now they're going up against this Broncos defense that has been so good. And you had some interesting kind of points about kind of what we're going to see from this game in the worksheet. Like, we're finally going to learn, I think, of this Broncos defense. This is the first maybe real test since but Tampa Bay, maybe like
Yeah.
several many weeks ago. We're going to finally learn some stuff, I think, about this Broncos defense, and it's going to be interesting to see how this Ravens team actually chooses to attack this defense, and I guess how real this Broncos defense really is. Because if they come into this game and they're really able to slow down this attack, which, as you mentioned, with all of the options they have in Baltimore, then you start to really talk about this Broncos defense being like, okay, this is one we're actually scared of a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and I always start with the offense too first, like in those matchups. Like, this offense hasn't really been stopped by anybody. Even last week against the Browns, especially in the second half, they were kind of back to doing what they wanted to do. So I always start with the offense first, and like it's like, all right, so how are you going to combat this? And we actually didn't talk about this with the Chargers Browns game either, and maybe just because people don't consider the Chargers a good defense, even though their metrics are good, because they haven't faced any good quarterbacks yet. Maybe Jameis fits with that same bucket, maybe he doesn't. But the Broncos have had a pretty good run out since Baker Mayfield. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, whatever you consider, Gardner Minshew. But they didn't stop the Chargers with Justin Herbert. It's not like Justin Herbert had an elite game, but I think that game was 20-0 at one point. Then they played Spencer Rattler and Bryce Young the past 2 weeks. Like, they've had a pretty elite run out of bad quarterbacks. I think there's a lot of teams like that this year, because offense in general has been kind of wishy-washy, and we don't have a lot of quarterbacks that have been consistently good all year. So we're going to have a lot of teams that just maybe luck boxed on the schedule, right? We're going to find some things out. The Steelers are another one of those teams. Like, the back half of the Steelers schedule looks a lot different than what they've faced so far, and we're going to learn some truisms about them as well. But this is our first test where we'll see, like, all right, now we have something to gauge the Broncos on. I do think that their style of defense, playing a lot of man coverage, is problematic, because for the reasons we just talked about. Like, the Ravens have just nothing but guys that get open. This isn't like the days of past with, Lamar Jackson, like, where he's thrown to, like, I don't know, like, who do they even have? Like Devin Duvernay and dudes like that. Like, he's out here throwing, like, he's got guys that can legitimately, like, I just laid out to you how much they're getting open. So if they're going to play a lot of man coverage against them, I think that's trouble.
Willie Snead 3 years after you
Yeah,
thought
Willie
Willie Snead was
Snead.
not in the league anymore. That was the one that always stuck with me, and I like, Willie Snead obviously had his glory days in New Orleans. He's obviously a very, very good, well, I don't know, but, a solid NFL receiver, but it was like 3 years later, and you're like, "Oh, Willie Snead is still here." The other thing about that man coverage is, Lamar Jackson's running a lot. We
Yep.
could see that exploitation of it, and so, yeah, it's a problem. And on the other side with Bo Nix, I mean, Bo Nix has obviously had this kind of run where we've been using him as a fantasy streamer, and I think people are excited about him this week. I actually did not have him as a streaming option in the waiver column, because if you go and look at again who they've been playing on, on the offensive side, and kind of where some of his successes come against, like it really hasn't been, he hasn't been challenged. And I know the Ravens defense has not been, great this year, but you had some numbers in there about them at home that I think are really interesting.
Yeah, I thought we'd get a lot of steam on the Wednesday night DFS show for Bo Nix, and there wasn't a lot. So maybe just people are happy with the run out that they got last week. Because on the surface, you're right. Like, it would be another spot to look at Bo Nix as a potential streamer. His QB1 weeks this season have come in spots that were identifiable. Panthers, Raiders, Buccaneers, teams we picked on the entire season. We know he can use his legs if we're getting a lot of dropbacks. And I think all of that still makes me interested. Like, if I'm in a 2 QB league with Bo Nix, that's fine. I think if you're in a 1 QB league and you're trying to stream and chase what we got last week, I think it gets a little more problematic for the Broncos, because you look at this history of quarterbacks going into Baltimore, and it doesn't mean like this for this iteration of the Broncos, but rookie quarterbacks are 2-16 in Baltimore since Harbaugh's taken over with the Ravens. That includes a Jaden Daniels game this year. Only 2 of those quarterbacks have thrown multiple touchdowns, and what a quarterback did in 2008 doesn't mean anything about Bo Nix this week. But then when you look at this season, the Ravens at home this year are allowing 7 yards per pass attempt. That's 15th in the NFL. 2.9% touchdown rate. That's 7th in the NFL. They have a 9.6 sack rate at home. That's 8th in the NFL, as opposed to on the road where they're 30th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 27th in touchdown rate, 17th in sack rate. And they face Jaden Daniels and Josh Allen at home, right? Like, it's not like they just like beat up on that list of quarterbacks that we just named, right? Like, they're facing the Spencer Rattlers at home in the world, and they're struggling in that regard. So I do still have a little bit of respect for them. They're probably going to get Nate Wiggins back. We'll see if they get Marlon Humphrey back this week as well. So I think from a QB2 stance, I think the fact that Nix can use his legs still puts him in play. And then if you run into a spike week, you take it. But outright, I think chasing the spike week is not an angle I'm taking with him this week.
I'm actually in one of those situations, QB2, because I have him and Geno Smith behind Lamar Jackson, interestingly enough,
Yeah.
in a league. And I'm kind of torn on that one. I think if DK comes back, I'll probably go with Geno Smith. But I mean, like, I want to talk a little bit about Matthew Stafford here, which actually, flows really well into that game. But as you kind of mentioned in the worksheet preview for that game, is that the Rams, with their rookies now, especially with Jared Verse, they're able to get pressure, and we know what pressure can do against Geno. And so even if DK Metcalf comes back, I'm not even sure that this matchup that they have against the Rams is even one you really want to chase. I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's problematic for them on a few levels because one, even if DK Metcalf plays, how healthy is he? We'll see. He needs to log full practices, right? Like if he logs
Yeah.
full practices, then that's different. Then we can maybe treat him because they have a bye the following week, so maybe they're getting him out there for like a high leverage snaps. He's a limited capacity. That's all guesswork. But the Rams, the past month, it's funny that these two teams flipped, and we knew Seattle opened up with like a pretty light schedule, and then they've had some injuries, but they're 29th in success rate against the pass in October after being 4th in September, and the Rams have flipped. They were 31st defending the pass in September, and they're 9th in October, and they faced some good quarterbacks too in this run. Guys like Brock Purdy. But the big thing is they're just getting a ton of pressure. And obviously, they got Darius Williams back and removed Trey White off the field, who probably, I think Sean McVay said it was unfair, the spot they put Tre'Davious White in. And he kind of acknowledged that, like they didn't plan on playing him that many snaps early in the season, but they were kind of forced to based on the guys they had out. But a level of pressure they're getting there, 5th in the NFL now in pressure rate. Jared Verse is 2nd in the NFL in pressure rate on all players with 100 or more defensive pass rushes, and Aiden Hutchinson is 1st, and that's not going to move because this isn't changing. And then they got Byron Young, who's also in top 20. I believe they're the only team with 2 guys in the top 20 of players that have over 100 pass rush snaps this season. And when they've actually gotten pressure on the quarterbacks the past month, they've only allowed 43% completion rate. That's 7th in the NFL. 6 yards per pass, that's 14th in the NFL. And last week when we had no DK Metcalf, Geno Smith threw for 2.9 air yards per pass. It was the fewest for any quarterback in the NFL in a game this season. That's something we were very concerned about last week, is how can they generate explosives without DK Metcalf? Because Jackson Smith-Njigba is not a guy that has won downfield yet in the NFL or been utilized downfield. Tyler Lockett's been a fine player, but he's not a guy that's not the Tyler Lockett of past, and they're not running the football at all, the Seahawks. So if DK is limited in any capacity and the Rams are getting pressure, it could be another spot where the Seahawks just struggle again to generate points.
You mentioned Aiden Hutchinson, and it made me really upset because I had such a good Aiden Hutchinson Defensive Player of the Year ticket that was well on its way to cashing before that injury. Get well soon, Aiden Hutchinson. But that does remind me that Jared Verse is like minus 110, minus 120 to win a Defensive Rookie of the Year right now, and I don't. Like, who else is it going to be? Like, that's the answer, barring an injury. Please don't get hurt, Jared Verse. I'm sorry if I've now cursed you. On the other side of it, you mentioned kind of the Seahawks and this change that we've seen in kind of their pass defense. And as you mentioned, the schedule got tougher and they just weren't able to stand up to it. We basically saw the same thing last year, which again continues to confuse me because I think there's a lot more talent on this defense than we've seen. They obviously changed the coaching staff, so it's a bit frustrating. But on the other side with Matthew Stafford, I mean, getting Puka Nacua back, getting Cooper Kupp back, we know what he can do. Over the last 2 years, he has 365 dropbacks with both those guys on the field, 7.9 yards per attempt, a 6.5% touchdown rate, which is, both of those are easily top 10 among qualified quarterbacks this year. So like that's the level we're talking about. And so I think we're kind of back in this. Stafford, we're definitely trusting him as a quarterback too. Can he get that like quarterback one upside? He has to run so hot because of his lack of, rushing totals. I mean, you and I both have more rushing yards than Matthew Stafford this year. I think he's at -7. And so it is, it's tough there. But with these two guys back, we're definitely back in at least considering Matthew Stafford in that streaming conversation every week, I think.
Yeah, you go back to last year, anytime the Rams have had all of Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Kyren Williams on the field, they're number 1 in the NFL in yards per play. So, I mean, this is an offense when they've been fully healthy, they've been really good. And last week they kind of bounced back. We were really waiting for that regression for Stafford anyways. And I think a lot of people were just circling like, well, once he gets the guys back. And that happened. And obviously he had that game against the Vikings. And this is a good spot for him as well. I think he can be streamed in QB1 leagues, but like you said, there is some fragility there just based on like if he only throws one passing touchdown, you're probably boned because he's not running. But this past month, I mean, Jared Goff, 27 fantasy points against the Seahawks. Daniel Jones without Malik Neighbors in Seattle had 22. Purdy, 24 points in Seattle. Josh Allen, 20 last week, and basically could have been a lot worse if that game was even close. So we feel pretty good about the spot for Stafford. Like I said, it's just he's got to run hot in the touchdowns because you're not getting the mobility. But we've seen a lot of those guys open the door this season because that's been a very nebulous spot. Like look at that CJ Stroud, right? And Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes actually does move a little bit more than obviously a guy like Stafford, but Kirk Cousins when he's not facing the Buccaneers. Like there's a lot of these guys for fantasy, and you just have to run into those touchdowns.
We're gonna move in and talk about that game here in a second. But you mentioned Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has 17 plays, 17 dropbacks that PFF has charted as being outside the pocket. The only qualified passer with fewer is Tua Tagovailoa, who's played 3 games. Like Kirk Cousins,
he had a
is
scramble
not
last
moving.
week, like a 12-yard run.
I did. I saw. Oh, and then he had that one where he like tried to get to the sideline and was immediately caught from behind. So maybe he's feeling better. Maybe we're going to see more movement. But his thing that he has this year of just he's in his spot and he's going to throw it, and that's it. I've actually enjoyed it. It's fun to watch a little bit. Let's move on to those game previews. I do want to mention every single game, every single fantasy relevant player is previewed by Rich Hribar over at Sharp Football Analysts, part of our fantasy package. You can use promo code Halloween to get 50% off of that fantasy package. Make sure you go and check that out. Let's do that Cowboys Falcons game. Falcons -2.5. The total in that game is 52. I originally had it written down in my notes as like 48.5. That's probably a mistake from me. I haven't had a chance to go back and look if it's moved or something like that, but 52 now. It's a massive total. It's obviously a game that we're going to be focused on from a fantasy perspective. And I think that Dak Prescott is really interesting because you had a lot of concerns about him entering the year, about some regression concerns, specifically with touchdowns. But it also just feels like he's run into a lot of bad matchups to this point, and maybe we're going to see the better side of Dak Prescott over the next several weeks.
I mean, maybe. I think the big question still, because you're right, like the schedule has done him no favors. But I think the two biggest questions still for Dak Prescott are still who outside of CeeDee Lamb is going to step up, and we have not really seen a consistent answer to that. And then what is this coaching staff doing? Dude, like the opening drive last week, the Cowboys go to 3rd and 5 out of a bye, and they open the game with a Hunter Luepke run on 3rd and 5. Like, what are we doing? Like, what are the Cowboys doing? Like, outside of these fourth quarter like comebacks, like this offense has shown no life. They're not creative. So I do have big top down questions still like that. Like those are still concerns for me. But this would be a spot, I think, for Dak to kind of get on track a little bit, coming off of this 3-game run where he's faced the Steelers, the Lions, and 49ers. The Falcons are 29th in pressure rate. They're dead last in the NFL in sack rate. They give up a lot of completions. They play a ton of zone coverage. So they have a lot of, 3 QB1 scoring weeks their past 4 games, multiple touchdowns in 4 straight games. This is a spot, I think, for Dak to be kind of maybe in that like fringy QB1 range. And maybe if you run hot on the touchdowns, you get a little bit more of a spike week. I think from a DFS perspective, if you were to stacking this game, something like Dak plus Lamb with Bijan Robinson coming back is like a pretty easily like triumvirate stack to make. But yeah, I mean, we need the other guys to consistently step up too. It can't be the whole plane just can't be built out of CeeDee Lamb targets.
Well, you say that, but maybe it can. I mean, they tried to end up last year, and as you mentioned, like CeeDee Lamb is just kind of primed to explode. We finally saw that last week
Yeah.
and saw that game. I'm glad you talked about Bijan Robinson because obviously Tyler Algier. One of the confusing things about the Falcons taking Bijan Robinson, not him as a player, but just that they already had Tyler Algier and he was already doing well, and we've seen Tyler Algier be effective. And there were times earlier this year in which, if you were somebody who had rostered Bijan Robinson, you were upset at kind of the usage. But we've really seen him start to take over this backfield in recent weeks, right?
Yeah, and I don't think we've seen the last of Algier. Just like last week, Braylon Allen kind of popped back up, after we had like the 2-game sample where, Breece Hall had that big run out. Maybe that was just because they play tonight and they were kind of, prepping him for the short week. We'll see. We'll see how much is, Braylon Allen's involved tonight. But yeah, I don't think we've seen the last of Algier, but the usage that we got from Bijan the last 3 games has been really encouraging, and especially in the red zone the past 2 weeks. He's outsnapped Algier 10-1. And he's also getting some more like inside zone runs too, where he was kind of all like outside zone run to start the year. So it's been nice to see him utilized in different capacity. He's still involved in the passing game, which we love. And they're another team, like the schedule just kind of opened up for them. The opening month of the season was kind of tough on the Falcons from a defensive stance. And from that point on till the rest of the season, like there really isn't a lot of spots to circle as like big thorns from a schedule stance for Bijan Robinson and this, Falcons offense. And this is not one of those. I mean, the Cowboys have been absolutely flooded on the ground. It doesn't matter who they've had on the field because they might get some guys back this week in Micah Parsons and Deron Bland. They're allowed the 3rd most touch points per touch to running backs this season. So it's another really good spot for Bijan to at least, even if Algier gets involved a little bit, to be effective on his opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that those defensive, like the Micah Parsons, if Micah Parsons comes back, it kind of doesn't seem like he's going to be back this week. But if Micah Parsons comes back, that's more of a effect, I think, on the passing game,
Yeah.
which might even like maybe we're even funneling more towards the run. I mentioned this, I tweeted, I think this yesterday. This Falcons kind of what they've been doing on offense has been interesting. First 3 weeks, they were 9% under their expected pass rate. 4 and 5, they were 5% over their expected passing rate. The last 3, they've been 6% under again. And you mentioned correctly so that some game script has played into that. But even like in some games that they were getting like crushed in over the last 3 weeks, they've really leaned into the running game. And I wonder if we start to see a little bit more than that. And that also raises the question about, we saw Drake London have his first like kind of lackluster game last week, even though the yardage hasn't been there, the catches and touchdowns have been there for him. We saw that happen last week. We saw Kyle Pitts like really emerge. He's been having some good games. We saw him really emerge. And so like the whole situation around this receiving core is interesting as well. And I guess the question is, are we really buying into Kyle Pitts now after kind of what we've seen over the last, several games?
We're buying in from the context of the tight end landscape. Like
Fair enough.
he's,
Yes, fair enough. Yes.
he's giving us usable tight end weeks, and he's getting splash plays, right? Like that's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, he has 1 catch of 20 or more yards in 4 in his past 4 games, and he, 30-yarder, a 52-yarder, 36-yarder, a 49-yarder. Like there's just not very many tight ends we can get like the one play out of. Like we're happy to get like a 49-yard game out of some guys. So if you have the capability to have like a 49-yard catch, we'll take notice. But he's lived on those big plays. And to a little bit of credit, they are finding some different ways to use him. He's getting more vertical routes than he did early in the season. And that was always one of the big questions with Kyle Pitts. We talked about in the tier section in the offseason, just like how was Zach Robinson going to find a way to use Kyle Pitts? Like this system hasn't had a tight end. Like they like to play their tight ends in line, and Pitts has played more in line this year than any point of his career, but they just hadn't had a player that had the field stretching ability as Pitts. So there's been kind of, I think, a trial and error and a learning process of how Zach Robinson wants to incorporate Pitts. He's 22% of his routes have been go routes the past 4 weeks. It was 13.1% the opening 4 weeks. So he's getting a chance to create those splash plays, but he still has 20% of the team targets in 1 game this season. In context, Drake London has 7, Darnell Mooney is 5, even Ray McLeod is 2. So we're still not getting like an elite target share from him, but we're happy to chase the big plays and take those on as like a back end tight end 1. And then you have more upside if they turn into touchdowns like last week.
Yeah. And please, Kyle Pitts, secure that ball all the way through the end
Ooh,
zone.
ooh.
That one was tough. I thought we were about to get a doghouse situation where we weren't going to see Pitts for a few series. And
I mean, if they call that a fumble, it's not getting overturned either.
Yeah. That was definitely one of those, whatever was called on the field was standing kind of situations. And I don't know. I think he was in my fantasy teams. One of them got a win because of that touchdown. So I think he was in. That is definitely my unbiased opinion of what happened there with it. We have a few questions in the chat. Some of them, I would suggest you head over to Rich's fantasy, his kind of start sit a chat that happens every Sunday morning as part of our fantasy package. So for fantasy football subscribers, you get a link to a private Q&A with Rich Hribar every single Sunday morning, 11:45 a.m. Eastern. I make sure you go and check that out. But Joanna actually asked, is Jalen Coker on the show sheet today? And he is not on the show sheet today, but I probably should have been talking about that Carolina kind of receiver situation and what we're doing now that Deontay
Well, he
Johnson
was on
is
my show
gone.
sheet today as a spoiler alert.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. We're gonna save that then. We're gonna save that then for the Uncut Gems. So Jalen Coker is coming up soon. All right, let's get through one more game before we get to I our Uncut Gems this week are going to be hilarious.
I mean, they
Last
are
week was
every
the
week.
first last week was the first week we really missed on like we really missed
Yeah,
last
Lowell
week.
Jordan Humphrey was back to playing over Troy Franklin. We were back to doing that dance with Sean Payton. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's Tavon Vele. Like they have like 5 receivers now. They've decided they're going to rotate in, and none of them are Marvin Mims. And so that is the situation that we have in Denver. All right, spoiler alert. We'll get to Coker in a second. All right, let's talk about the Lions at the Packers. Which this is an interesting game, but the real question of this game is something we don't know, which is
Right.
will Jordan Love play? And you kind of raised this point on a call we were on yesterday about we've seen the Packers do this gamesmanship already. And so Jordan Love coming out on Thursday morning, I believe he came out and said that, he thinks he has a realistic shot to play. We've already seen that happen this year. And then he, just didn't play. So it's really tough to know what we're doing in this game.
I mean, he's another guy. I think you got to see if he practices at all, right? Because they're another team. They are on bye next week. And obviously this is a big game, home against the Lions, a team you're going to have to go through to win the division. So I do understand that it is a big game, and that could play, an impact into trying to push Jordan Love on the field. But they also, I think this coaching staff in particular, if you look at the Packers' history of how they've handled injuries, they are a very cautious team. And the coaching staff, the coaching tree that LaFleur comes from is very much under the same milk. They're very cautious with injuries. So if he's not 100%, I still don't think he's going to play. I don't think they're going to push him because they know that they want him big picture. They'll have this 2-week window to have him come back. They're at Chicago out of the bye. So it's another game that they're probably going to need to win in context of pushing for the division and fighting off the other teams that are really congested in that division, which turned out to be arguably one of the better divisions in football, if not the best this season. It's definitely going to be, kind of a big fight after the Lions. I think we're settling into, are you on board that the Lions are the best team in the NFL or no?
Yeah, I think I've gotten there now. I just wonder, the Chiefs, I don't know. They're still
Yeah, I
undefeated and
know.
they
It's
just
still the
keep winning.
Chiefs.
It's like they're undefeated, they keep winning for no reason, like for reasons that are beyond comprehension. They just
But I just
continue
think
to win.
teams that are playing from in all capacities, like passing, running,
Yeah.
defense, they're doing, and special teams now. Shit, you count that
Yeah.
last week. They're just doing everything really well at a good level. Where
That win against the Titans where they didn't even have to do anything. Like they didn't do anything in that game and they just scored 52 points and wiped that team. And it's funny because there was that Mason Rudolph touchdown, he really celebrated. And at that point it was kind of a game. And I was like, oh, are we gonna have some fun here? Because we've seen some of this, some of these teams, these really good teams struggle against maybe teams that they should be beating. And obviously the Titans defense I do think is legitimately good. I think it actually is a pretty good unit. And then they just all right, we're just gonna score half 100. And it felt like almost without trying. It was just the wildest game to just go and look at. And yeah, I think to your point, the defense has definitely improved to the point. Jared Goff, I have a note here. Are we just giving Jared Goff the MVP now, or are we waiting till the end of the season? When's the
No,
next
it's
time he's going
Lamar
to throw it?
Jackson. Lamar Jackson is clearly the MVP.
When's the next time Jared Goff's going to throw an incompletion? When is that going to happen again?
Imagine if Jared Goff had Khalil Shakir. There'd never be an incomplete pass.
No pass would is so Rich is saying for everybody in Detroit, Rich is saying that Khalil Shakir is better than Amon-Ra St. Brown. So definitely get it as mentions. That's definitely what he just said. But yeah, you're probably right that it's Lamar Jackson. But Goff is playing out of his mind and just doesn't throw incompletions now. It's really fascinating what we're watching from a kind of fantasy perspective this week, though. There is an outcome here where Willis starts. actually is forced to throw, because he hasn't been forced to throw, their drop back rate with Willis in the game is like 33%, 34%, something like that. And so he hasn't been forced to throw. Willis starts, the Lions force them to actually have to throw the ball. They run away from the Packers like they did the Titans this week, and that just crushes the fantasy value of Goff, of everybody in this passing game. And really all we're looking at is, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery if he gets a touchdown. And so like that could certainly be a path that this game takes, I think.
Yeah, but you seen last week, you still got the 3 passing touchdowns. I mean, Ben
Sure.
Johnson is in his F around mode. Like every time they get in the red zone, it's like the Chiefs were doing this for a couple of years where like they're doing ring around
Yeah.
the Rosie inside the 5. They're getting McCole Hardman, jet sweeps, and Noah Gray shovel passes. And the Lions have turned into that team now. They're out here just like, you know what we're gonna do? We're just gonna have David Montgomery throw a touchdown. We're gonna throw to a lineman. Like they're out here just doing just having fun. Ben Johnson's just pulling out stuff like just crazy plays. That hook and ladder they ran against Arizona early in the season is still one of the dopest plays. Why isn't that play run more? Why do we not see that play run more?
Travis
NFL?
Kelce asked the same question in every offensive meeting he's ever
And
he's ever
they've
been
actually
to.
used it. Well, last week they ran it again with P Ryan, right? Or maybe it was 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
but they did it again with Kelce and but like that should be a play that's actually like teams should actually run that play. Because people will talk about the Goff outdoor stuff in this, and I don't care unless it's like snowing or raining. I've always talked about that. Like when he faces teams and when the weather's fine, he's fine outdoors. Especially the matchup lines up. And I think from a matchup perspective, because the Packers are a team that they have a lot of turnovers on defense, and they're really living on those turnovers. But this in particular matchup, one, they're playing a quarterback that really hasn't turned the ball over, and then two, Jared Goff uses play action more than any quarterback in the NFL. And using play action, he is first in the NFL in completion rate, 80% of those. He's first in yards per pass attempt, 11.7 yards per pass attempt, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. And the Packers have been night and day versus play action and non-play action passes. I mean, on play action passes, they are 22nd in completion rate, 19th in yards per pass attempt, 20th in touchdown rate allowed. With no play action, they're 7th in completion rate, 17th in yards per pass attempt, 4.2% touchdown rate. They've been getting really susceptible because they're an aggressive defense to play action passes, and I think we're going to probably see Ben Johnson do a lot more play action passing in this game. So I worry about the Packers being able to slow them down with no Jordan Love. Are they just able to generate enough plays to combat like a high scoring Lions game? But we'll see if we get Jordan Love or not.
Yeah, and I mean, if we get Jordan Love or not really answers the question about what you're doing with the pass catchers. You mentioned with Kyle Pitts, it's really nice to have a tight end that can create big plays. And because of his ability after the catch, Tucker Kraft can do that. And so, he is the kind of guy that you get 2 or 3 catches, it might work out for him. But with all of those other receivers, with, Jaden Reed, with Romeo Doubs, with Christian Watson, with Dontavian Wicks, which we saw an interesting change there with kind of the usage between Watson and Wicks last week. That is certainly something we need to watch moving forward. But ultimately, probably none of that matters unless we get Jordan Love. And so it's a tough situation here with this game. I felt like we had to talk about it because it is it's the game of the week, right? It's definitely the one that we're looking forward to. But ultimately, if we don't get Jordan Love, I do wonder what this ends up being, because as excited as we've been about Malik Willis and kind of what the Packers have been able to do to them with him, and kind of versus what we saw with him with the Titans, right? That a lot of that has been predicated on him just being in a good situation, and the Lions are definitely a team that could put them in a bad situation. Joanna actually mentions in the chat, Love sees a realistic chance of suiting up on Sunday. Yeah, I mean, he said that, but can we trust Jordan Love? And with after we saw at the beginning of the year, I don't know. We'll see. All right, let's move on and talk about Uncut Gems. I guess I now know who your Uncut Gem is. So tell me a little bit about Jalen Coker.
I'm just gonna martingale Jalen Coker. That's just like what I'm gonna swerve into. I talked about it a little bit on the DFS show last night. I tried to make him happen a couple weeks ago with Deontay Johnson in that Commanders game, and he just didn't have the run out. And honestly, none of the Panthers had any type of run out in that game. But now with Deontay Johnson removed, I really think the young wide receivers were part of this move, and we'll see if they end up moving Adam Thielen here too before it's next week, right? Next week's trade deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Election day is a trade deadline. What a wild day that could be for everybody. That might be fun.
But I think we're pretty close to Panthers in like play the young guys mode, right? Like let's see what we have with Xavier Leggett and Jalen Coker. And I think from just when you're because I'd have no problem if you do want to, chase Leggett too. He leads the team in end zone targets outside of Deontay Johnson, who's no longer on the team. But Coker's been the better player on a per snap basis. He has a first down or touchdown in 74% of his targets. That leads the team. He leads the team in yards per out run now with Deontay Johnson. And in this individual matchup, it does signal there's more signal for Coker than it would be Leggett on the outside. The Saints are still pretty good against outside wide receivers, but against slot receivers, where Coker played 74% of his snaps. Now, earmark this because if Thielen plays, it could alter this as well. But they're 28th in receptions allowed per game to slot receivers, 29th in yards per target allowed to slot receivers. I won't give the whole prospect spiel on Coker because I did that last time when he came out, when we tried to make this happen. But I'm going back to him this week. I like this game from a stacking perspective for DFS too. I think you have a pretty clear path here to do something with, Derek Carr. Maybe you have another guy, Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Coker coming back, and you've got a lot of salary left over still too, even with the Kamara and Olave buys as part of that because Carr and Coker are so cheap. And then you have another cheap guy in this game as well.
Yeah, I have Mason Tipton also in this game. It's funny because we don't discuss this ahead of time, and we continue to identify exactly the same kind of situations that we're looking for. So yeah, I'm going to take Mason Tipton in here, who only had 2 targets last week, but he was on the field for nearly 90% of the passing plays, which is what we want to see. The Saints are likely to be without Bub Means and Cedric Wilson in this. Obviously, we're getting Derek Carr back here, or at least we're assuming we're getting Derek Carr back. A lot of this game changes if Derek Carr is not returning, but if we're operating under the assumption that's there. And given Tipton's speed, which I believe he ran like a 4.33, at some point in the pre-draft process, he seems like he is the best option they have available to replace some of that stuff that Rashid Shaheed was doing. Can he be Rashid Shaheed? I don't know. Probably not. I think Shaheed's probably a pretty good player, but he can definitely get down the field. He can take advantage of the attention that we're going to see from Chris Olave. I do expect this offense. I mean, Olave had nearly a 40% target share this last week. It's not going to be that high, but I do expect a lot of this offense to run through Olave, a lot of this passing game to run through Kamara, who's going to get back into that, relatively high target share kind of conversation. But with the type of player Tipton is, with what we saw from this passing game earlier in the season, especially against the Panthers in that season opener, right? That was the season opener between these two teams. I think we could see Tipton get a couple catches, 3 or 4 catches maybe, and especially one of them be a long play. Maybe it's a touchdown. I think there's a lot of appeal here for Tipton, in deep leagues. And then, like you say, if you're stacking this game, if you want to play Derek Carr in this situation, then I think that he's somebody you can add in there with an Olave, or if you want to play him and Kamara together. Like, I think there's a lot of interesting things you can do with this entire passing game.
Yeah, this is definitely the gross game for DFS of the week, but it could have some fun gems from it. And I don't think we're going to get the same run out from the Saints as the opening 2 weeks, but they did get Cesar Ruiz back, which was a significant add to the offense last week. They even with Spencer Rattler, they were able to generate some explosives, and we saw Olave and Kamara get there. I think with Derek Carr coming back, even if we don't get back to the glory of the first 2 weeks, I do think that Olave and Kamara are set up to be the position strongly to be fantasy factors for the rest of the season.
And I know nobody cares about your fantasy team, but I was looking through my Best Ball Mania rosters, and I don't know if it's just how the draft fell or whatever, but there are a lot of those that were looking great, and then also have Shaheed and Chris Godwin in them, and I may have cried.
Yeah, I mean, two of the better buys. I don't check my best balls during the season, but I know for a fact my highest rostered player was Shaheed. My highest drafted player was Shaheed. He just never, his ADP just never moved. Like, right,
it was wild.
It felt like everyone liked him. Like, there was no secret. Like, I wasn't the only person that liked Shaheed, so it's like no victory lap. But it felt like every show I went on, someone was like, I love Shaheed too. And his ADP just never moved. Like, it just stayed the same the entire summer. And I'm like, everyone likes this dude, but his ADP is not changing. And there was like a point where I was like, I should not take Shaheed as much, but then he was just still there. I was like, he's the best player. Every time like the draft spot came up, it's like, oh, I'm just going to keep taking him. He's the best player to take. And so that's probably a bad sign for when I do finally check, but hey.
It was going so well. Oh, it was going so well. What are you gonna do? All right, that's it for us. We're done for this week. We're gonna go cry about Rashid Shaheed. Get well soon, King. We're big fans. Get well soon. So we're gonna go cry about that. Make sure you head over to Sharp Football Analysis. Check out all of Rich's work over there. His worksheet previews, as I said, his DFS picks will be available Saturday morning. Generally, his DFS picks are available. All of that part of the fantasy package. You can get 50% off this week using promo code Halloween. So make sure you take advantage of that opportunity. Get what I consider the best fantasy content in the business. So make sure you do that. Also, if you're listening to us as a podcast, we appreciate that. Make sure you subscribe. If you'd like to join us live, you can head over to YouTube, search for Sharp Football Analysis, subscribe, and you'll get notifications. All of that's available. We appreciate the support, and we'll be back to talk with you next week.